were discussing yesterday that the concept of prophecy doesn't mean knowing the future, being told anything which most people don't know about. The basic concept of prophecy is God communicates with the human being. That's prophecy. What he communicates, that's a separate discussion. So yesterday we spoke, why is it just logical and compelling, and there's no other way to understand it? If you believe there's a God, and God is the creator, so if he's a creator, he created for a purpose. If there is, whatever that purpose may be, he had to share that purpose with the human being. Because otherwise, how does the human being understand and begin understanding what the value of his life is, and what should he invest his life? What is right, what's wrong? If everything is only what a person believes to be, you understand, you don't create a universe as God created for man to try to figure it out, where he has no inkling or doesn't even begin to understand what is and what's not. And especially if the objective is his spirituality, which is his soul, that something is brilliant intelligence he may be, it's a different realm of existence that we don't have the capacity or the faculties to be able to evaluate and process that information. So therefore, you must say there's no other way to understand it. If there is a creator, and the creator created this existence, this vast existence, it was for a purpose, he had to communicate that purpose to the human being. That's where it begins, that's where it ends. Therefore, that man communicates to the human being is a fundamental in existence, and that's rational thinking. It's not considered fanatical thinking. You know, it's interesting. You ask a person, which I discussed in the past, what is the value of anybody's existence? So the person answers, to serve God. They say, you know, something, you belong in a monastery or in a convent or in some kind of whatever it is. That seems too extreme. It's not extreme at all. If you believe in God, and God created the world for a reason, you understand, as I said, I have to look for a different place. Canyon Ranch, I'm ready, you know, I've already depleted that reference. I have to find some other place. Maybe in North Dakota, they have somewhere, you know, a water hole with a buffalo, where they water them. I'm not sure. So if you have that objective, that purpose, he shared it with the human being. Not only did he share it, he communicated it. That is your value. That's the objective. And what about the concept of reward and punishment? If a man doesn't have any fear and is inclined to do as he chooses to do, where are you going? You're going where you believe you want to go. Follow your inclination. The physicality of a human being has every animalistic drive. The intellect is the only holdback to control that animal. The Minchas says something very interesting. You know, there's a horse that's called a man of war. When they would go to war in the olden days, the horse was trained by the warrior who rode that horse, that he was able to kill with the horse. The horse was trained that as under the direction of the rider, who was a powerful warrior to be able to control that horse, he could direct the horse to trample or to topple another person's horse just by bumping into that with its body, with a level of impact, could even kill the rider. That was called the man of war. This man of war has such power, this horse is trained. You would think the human being physically cannot compare with the power of that horse. And the horse is leading the human being. But little do you know that because that rider is trained and has the strength, he has the reins, and with his legs, he tightens his legs around that body, because the warrior doesn't control the horse with his hands, holding the reins, because he has a weapon. He's fighting on the horse as he's riding that horse. So how does he direct the horse? His feet are so powerful that he squeezes the horse and he directs the horse in whatever direction may be. That's the way the warrior would ride and confront the enemy on this kind of horse. You would think the horse is leading the rider. The rider is leading the horse. As much as you think, but if you understand the dynamic of rider and horse, regardless what that horse is, and the power of the horse, the rider is controlling that horse. A person has an earthiness. We possess every animalistic drive and instinct and inclination. And you have something in your brain that's called intelligence. Based on that understanding, you're able to control every movement of your physical existence, to direct it wherever it may be. I'll give you an example. Person's on a boat, and the current in the river or the ocean is overwhelmingly strong. You have a rudder. As you turn that rudder will determine in what direction that boat goes. Does the person have the power of that current? The current is what is beyond human capacity. You can't go against the current, but you could use the current by using that rudder in what direction you're going. Are you going over the falls or are you going in the opposite direction? It depends what direction you turn that rudder. But you're a little man. You don't have the power. You understand? No, but if you know how to maneuver that boat, you could actually determine what direction that boat's going due to the rudder. You have a ship with sails. If the sails are up and you have a gale wind, the captain has no control over that boat. Only to a degree, because the wind is so fierce, filling those sails with the wind, it's directs it. So what do you have? You have to lower the sails. And you have to lower the sails before the wind is too intense. Otherwise, you can't even lower the sails. But if you lower the sails and the wind blows, the ship could basically be pretty much stabilized. Once you have those sails up, so who determines how quickly the boat goes? Although you have forces of nature, the human being, due to his intellect, is able to control and utilize the forces of nature in the most constructive or destructive way. Identically, a human being is endowed with two components. One's a spiritual component, which the intellect is connected to that spiritual component, which is called the soul, and the physicality, which is all the emotion, the drives, the bulk of the person, desire, ego, all this kind of software which is put into that person. But you understand, you can control it. It's miraculous. It's interesting. If you have conscience, as much as a person wants to do something, but if a person has a conscience, there's certain lines we can't cross. Could you imagine, unless the person is totally demented, to go into a kindergarten or to go into a nursery in a hospital and begin killing, God forbid, all the newborns? And the person has to be literally an animal, uncivilized, to behave this way. One's conscience wouldn't allow him to do this. But everybody has different degrees of conscience. Maybe a newborn not. What about an adult? And you have an objective. The objective is you want his wealth. Or you want to take over his company. And the only way you can do it is by removing him. And you can only remove him by taking his life. God forbid. Some people, for that, they're able to reconcile that with their conscience. And they're able, for a moment, to really suppress it, to do what they want to do. This is how complicated a human being is. Because we rationalize. But if God comes to you and says, reads you the riot act, just telling you up front, this is your value, this is your purpose. If you cross those lines, you can hear the music. Not only in stereo, you can hear it in every direction. That's how intense that music is going to be. And the pain, there's no pain which is comparable to that pain that the person should suffer. If you hear it directly from God, it's not abstract intellectualism. It's not what they say, but what it is. The Ramchal writes in the work, Derech Hashem, the way of God. Now, could you imagine you have an electric system, maximum can only take 220 volts, and you put in it 100 million volts through that system. You know what you do? The house is not going to stand. The house will explode. The system doesn't have the capacity, and that kind of wattage coming into that location doesn't have the capacity to contain that wattage. What is prophecy? Ramchal says, when a prophet prophesizes and God communicates with that person, it's not he hears a voice. Hearing is we hear with our faculties. When we understand with our faculties. When a prophet receives that communication, God is directly connected to his soul. It's God's soul connection. And that's why what the prophet understands after a prophecy, it could take 100 years to accumulate that much knowledge, which the prophet gets in one moment. Because it's a spiritual connection. Within spirituality, there's no limitation. It's not finite. But because it's directly to the core of the person, Ramchal writes, after one receives a prophecy, even for a moment, the human being is no longer the same human being. You're not the same person. A person's been touched by God through prophecy, that's the core of his being. It's no longer abstract. It's no longer theory. It's reality beyond reality. It's an experience which is more than you experience something with your senses. That's what it is. Now, he asks a question. You know, they used to have the death penalty in the United States. New York State had the electric chair. They would put the person on this chair, hook him up with all kinds of electric wires. They put a hood on his head, and they'd have to strap him to that chair with a type of belt that, so the question is why? He dies, he's limp. No. The amount of electricity which surges through his body, literally, he's vaporized. His brain is fried. His eyes pop out of his head. The intensity of that force of electricity that goes through his body, he convulses like something you've never seen anybody convulse to that degree. Therefore, he has to be secured to that chair, wear that hood, and his feet are even tethered to the ground, because otherwise he'd go in 6 different directions. His body would be dismembered. That's that force of that electric current that goes through his body. God communicated with a prophet. The person should die instantaneously. He should not survive it. If you read the Rambam, or even in scripture, the prophets, when a prophet begins having the prophetic experience, all of a sudden, it's like he's having an epileptic fit. He starts convulsing. Why? Because when he starts having this experience, what's coming upon him is something which is beyond human capacity. And then he falls into a dead faint. He's unconscious during the prophecy, because his faculties don't have the capacity to receive that degree of spirituality, which is God's presence himself. So the question is, how does he live? How does he survive? So the Ramchal writes, God puts him on life supports. What does it mean he's on life support? That despite the fact that a person humanly cannot survive. God wills that he should remain alive and intact, and his physicality should not be damaged by this. There's a special intervention for the prophet, because otherwise the person can't receive prophecy, he would die. Not only die, as I said, his body would be dismembered because it doesn't have the capacity to receive such a communication or to receive such a connection to the infinite. That's the concept. As a result of that, you know what it means to have an experience with God at that level, where your physicality is even hooked up to a spiritual system which allows you to remain alive. Otherwise, the person would die. He says that human being, even if he prophesies for one moment, will never be the same human being ever again. That experience is not only an abstract experience, it goes beyond reality. He's a different person. I'll give you just a semblance of understanding of this. The Vilna Gaon had a level of genius which we cannot fathom his genius. Although he lived in the 1700s, he was as great as people who lived in the year 1100, Torah-wise. He had a capacity which was not to be believed, not only in Torah, in sciences, astrology, astronomy, all this, mathematics. The professors from all the universities, he allowed at a certain time of the year, they could come and consult with him in the fields of astronomy, philosophy, whatever it was, where they were confounded. They couldn't figure certain things out. They had difficulties. And they would come, and within a few moments, he would explain to them where they made a mistake. And the moment he clarified it, within astronomy, they understood the galaxies, whatever they were able to relate to, he explained it to them. Mathematics, they had certain things. They were working on certain theses, math, whatever it is, within moments. He explained to them exactly why they had difficulty, why they couldn't come to a conclusion. They lined up. These are all Gentile, the intelligentsia of the Gentile population. The accommodations, professors. When he passed away, the Vilna Gaon came to an end. And they mourned his passing because they didn't have that trove of knowledge, which they had, connection, after he passed away. That was the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon slept only 2 hours in a 24-hour period, never more than a half an hour at a time. Every moment of his existence was fully invested in Torah. Of course, he was divinely inspired, everything. He only had a relationship with his inner circle of students. Even when he would pray, only his inner circle of students prayed with him. And once in a while, they would allow a guest to join. But the person had to be qualified to join this holy quorum. And this person told over a story that his grandfather, who lived in Vilna, was allowed to attend a Ma'ariv service with the Vilna Gaon. And his grandfather was a learned person, a devout person. He spent the Ma'ariv with the Vilna Gaon, and he heard the way the Vilna Gaon articulated the words of the Shema. That's all. After he heard the Vilna Gaon say the Shema, the words coming out of his mouth with its focus and intensity and holiness, his grandfather became a different person. As learned as he was, as devout as he was, he graduated to a level which he couldn't, and he was exposed to the Vilna Gaon for 15 minutes, hearing the Shema. That's it. Nothing more than that. Because then his understanding of God was a different reality. Different reality. Even people who have life-death experiences, we will have short memories. Maybe we forget. Yom Kippur, you were so intense, you found you're going to turn over every leaf. The moment you drink down that Tropicana orange juice and you have that Danish, it's like it never happened. Yeah, you already have tickets to go to the show. Post Yom Kippur. because it's the last showing of the season. You got to go to that show, and you got the tickets free, or you got it on Ticketmaster. You got to use those tickets because they're going to expire. Because it's all abstract. Even when we go through it, it's not concrete. It's what we believe. It's not what you have an experience with the Vilna. It's not what you believe. It's what you see. That's what you experience. The Navi, the prophet, it's not something what he sees. It's something what he connects to. I'll give you an example. A person had a very serious burn because he touched something and his flesh became seared from the heat. And he has a scar still. Scar will never go away unless he has plastic surgery. And whenever he goes near that appliance that he got burnt, he relives that moment. You understand? He doesn't say, well, it happened. When he sees that hot appliance and the pain that originally, he relives that pain. It's like reliving reality. He can't get it out of his mind, out of his emotion, out of his gut. And he remembered how he passed out. The pain was intolerable to that degree. They call it deja vu. When God connects with the prophet, it's something comes emblazoned in his mind, in his heart, in his emotion. You can't get it. You can't get it out of your mind, out of your emotion, and therefore you become a different person. God is always before your eyes. You can't get God out of your mind. Tell you a story. We had a person. He was a pediatric urologist. He used to come to Yad Avram. Lives in Englewood. His name was Richie Schlossel. His name is Richie Schlossel. People know him. And although today he's in his probably upper 50, he looks like he's about 25 years old. He was the head of urology at Mount Sinai, different hospitals, travels around the world doing all kinds of procedures in Africa, South America, even went to Haiti. Even to Haiti he went. He didn't meet Bob's wife there. She was in Haiti on some kind of chesed mission to provide education for these people there. Okay? Because she speaks French. She could. This guy only has a scalpel, can't speak French. And he was driving from Jersey into the city, and there was an accident on the road. And the accident victim, the car flew open, and the victim, the driver, was thrown onto the road. Very badly hurt, maybe brain injury, very bad, almost mutilated. And his son, who was a teenager, 15, 16-year-olds, was in the car. And he opened the door and he saw the person lying there. He saw the car, the wreck, and he saw the person unconscious on the ground. His son had to go into therapy to get that image out of his mind. It affected him so negatively, he never saw such a thing in his life. Couldn't get it out of his mind, out of his emotion, and he became hung up with that, what he had witnessed, what he saw. They weren't the cause of the accident, nothing. It's only he was a few car lengths from it, and he was able to see it. Lahavdil elef havdolos. When you have that experience with God, which surpasses that infinite times over, how are you left after that experience? You're enthused, inspired, spiritualized. There's no word to explain what you are. You serve God differently. David says, Shvisi Hashem Negdi Summit. God is always before my eyes. You can't sin. Well, it's difficult to sin. As the Ramoses and Shulchan Aruch, the glosses, a person, when you're in the presence of the king, you behave one way. When you're in the presence of your own privacy of your home, you behave differently. Because if you're conscious, you're in the presence of the king, you speak different, your body language is different, and you dress differently. And the subject matter is a different subject matter. Because you understand, it's inappropriate in the presence of the king to speak this way or behave this way. That's Shivisa Hashem Negdi Tomit. God was always before David's eyes. And so that's why David was David. But how do you arrive there? To create such a level of cognizance and reality, which goes beyond intellect, it becomes a reality of your being. Anybody who's a prophet has that now because he had that firsthand experience. He connected with the source of everything. This is a little bit of a slight understanding what prophecy is. What happens to the prophet when God communicates with the prophet? Even once in a lifetime. Some prophets prophesy once in a lifetime, nothing more than that. And what was the prophecy? Something which related to themselves, not to anybody else. For some reason, God had something to communicate to that person. And a prophet's not permitted to share with anyone whatever that communication is to that person. But for that one moment connection, it's a different reality in your life. You know, in life, we have endowments from Hashem. Person's endowed with a superior intelligence. That's an endowment. You can't pride yourself. The question is, how do you use that intellect? You know, that's the question. But that you have that superior IQ, you're born with it. Person that has a natural physique, he has tremendous strength, more than most people. He didn't ever have to go to a gym to work out, just he has a different capacity. He's endowed with it. Person was lucky to have a rich father before he was born. And he was an only child. He's wealthy because his father, he was the only heir. That's the reality. A person has charisma. Charisma is an endowment. You have somebody who's endlessly more brilliant, wiser, but yet this little, whatever you want to call him, gets up on that stage, he has charisma. It's an endowment. And he has the ability due to that to influence people because he has that charisma. Okay? Now, I always say, because I'm not a chassid, it's difficult to me to say over a chassidic story. Person's a chassid, that's his orientation, he could tell over those stories. I have difficulty. Unless it has a semblance to a Lithuanian type of story, I can't tell it over. I won't do justice to communicate what it's supposed to be communicated. But I could tell you, when I tell over a story from the Lithuanian world or the Russian world, where this is where I come from, my parents, my grandparents, and my orientation in yeshiva, from my Rosh Yeshiva, where they came from, when I tell of the story, I could tell it over as if I lived that story. I'm not telling just a story. Because when I don't tell the story just to tell the story. I tell the story because there's a message which I communicate with the story. There's a takeaway. There's something to be learned from that story. As a result of that, I internalize it. It's not, I'm communicating intellectualism to you. It's more than just intellect. I coalesce my emotion as if I experienced that whatever happened because I relate to it totally. So when I give it over, it's not just abstract intellectualism, but rather it's combined and it has intertwined with it is emotion. When you express something with emotion, it touches emotion. And that's what we say. When a person's sincere and you say something from your heart, it penetrates somebody else's heart. Because it's going from heart to heart. It's not just brain to brain. That's what it is. You know, you have two iPhones and you transfer information, you put them next to one another. That's brain to brain or mechanism to mechanism. And as a result of that, when I teach and I teach a concept, it's more than a concept they understand. I feel the concept. I internalize that concept. And therefore, when I give it over, I'm giving it over with a cogency as I'm experiencing and as I grasp it, whatever I'm giving over for that reason. So the prophet, Lahavdil, the prophet and myself, he experiences, his core is touched. So when he understands, it's not just in his brain. pure intellect. It's the core of his being. When you experience into the core of your being, that's what prophecy is. It's a different reality. He functions differently. His decisions are different. Not only because he has another level of clarity, but it's just the experience made a change in him, which is permanent.